Well, welcome back again. Our next speakers created the fashion tech studio Amped Atelier as a way to explore modern fabrication techniques and interactivity in clothing through the medium of wearable art, which is of particular interest to me, if any of you know me. I hope you will enjoy their talk as much as I will. I welcome Sahrye Cohen and Hal Rodriguez as they share details about conductive melody, a Couture instrument.
Well, welcome. We're really excited to be able to talk about our piece, Conductive Melody. I'm Sahrye, and this is Hal. Together, we have a little wearable tech couture design studio called Amped Atelier. So we started this piece in 2019 as part of Make Fashion, which is a group out of Calgary. And this was for a presentation at Beakerhead, which is a science and art and music festival in Calgary. One of the things that we like to create are wearable garments that have interactivity. So both of these examples I have up here on the screen are, one is a piece that has a color sensor, so the model can change the color of the lights in the garment. They're 3D printed lights. And she can change that with the color sensor using different objects. And then on the right-hand side is a piece that we made for a dancer that has an accelerometer. And she's controlling the speed and the color and the action of the lights on this garment through her dance moves. So it's kind of really important to us that the garments we make are not just pretty flashy lights, although that's fun too, but they can be controlled by the person that's wearing them, or they can be controlled by, sensors that interact with the environment or even the audience. So some of the pieces we make have Bluetooth, and they can be controlled by the audience as well. So when we were thinking about this design and thinking about how to make a essentially wearable instrument, so I like to play around with electronics and make garments and do costuming, and Hal really likes synthesizers and kind of electronic music. And we were thinking about what are some examples of essentially musical instruments and how we could fit those onto a garment. So one of the things I was thinking of were harps, large stringed instruments. And this is an example of a historical garment, kind of medieval houppelans and other kinds of garments that have really large sleeves. And that would give us plenty of room to do kind of a conductive fabric interface for this. And then other examples that we can look at are pianos, which also have kind of a keyboard that you can touch, and then kind of strings extending from that with hammers that are making the musical notes, and kimonos that have also very large sleeves that provide a lot of space to make this interface. There's been some wearable instruments that are kind of drum kits. There's a drum hoodie that people have made and other kinds of ones, but I wanted to make sure that there was enough room for the wearer to really demonstrate that they were playing that instrument, and also to be able to kind of make it a performance. So they're performing the music and they're performing the garment. So I start all of my pieces by essentially doing a design sketch. Some of these are rougher than others. You can see on the right that there's one that's basically just like a humanoid shape that has kind of ideas of what this garment might look like. And usually if it's a piece that we're going to make, I develop it into more of a complete design sketch. So on the left-hand side, I have an example that would kind of use a kimono-inspired sleeve with these metallic kind of scrolly Baroque or floral interface that I wanted to use for the wearer to do the interactive music. And then as I produce a piece, I typically do a mock-up. For those who make wearables or garments, this is typically called a muslin. It uses a very thin cotton fabric, and it's intended to, just see how the garment might fit. I do this through a combination of drafting using measurements from the body and then also draping. So here I've made a piece that has, a sleeve, a bodice, and a skirt. And then because I wanted to make it a little bit different than some of the dress type garments that we've made before, I added some leggings to kind of give it a different look. And then as that comes together, I usually choose fabrics. One of the things that I really like to do for my garments for like tech couture is to use couture techniques and materials. So for example, this garment is made out of silk. I just think that it helps, you know, when you're gonna do a one-off creation, it really helps to pay attention to those details. And another design style that I like is to kind of hide my electronic components. So in the center here, there's a semi-sheer net piece with sequins and beading. And some of my electronic components for my lights are going to go behind that. Here's an example of the couture techniques that I use inside the garment. I find that this helps them wear better and just makes a more beautiful and complete project. I've bound the seam allowances in bias. I have a netting piece that contains the light strands that I'm going to use, and that's sewn onto the main garment so that it can be removable. Definitely something I think about a lot in making wearables is how will this be worn? How will it be washed? How can somebody care for it? One of the materials that we really like to use are conductive fabrics, tapes, and thread. So I made conductive pom-poms, all sorts of sewn garments that have conductive thread. For this, I wanted the conductive interface to be very large, and I used a conductive fabric. This was, you know, fairly easily acquired. It has, I believe, steel woven through it and is colored copper. And it is mostly a polyester fabric. So what I did was I bound the fabric with heat and bond, and that has an adhesive on both sides. So it binds the conductive fabric to the silk. And then using design software, Illustrator, we drew these kind of organic, almost Art Nouveau interfaces that kind of replicate the strings of a harp, and then cut them out on a laser cutter, and then bonded them onto the silk. And so this is what formed kind of the interface, the conductive fabric interface for our instrument.
Yeah. So this is what's going on in the dress. We have, as Sahrye mentioned, essentially the main interface, the main control area is the sleeve. And the sleeve is the copper looking fabric is basically sensed by a capacitive touch sensor. We're using, I think, a breakout board made by, I think, Adafruit. And it all communicates, the touches are all communicated to a small Arduino. The small Arduino controls the lights on the dress. So as notes are played, you'll see the lights will light up in sync with the thing because they're responding basically to the touch as well. There's lights on both the front and the back of the dress, and that's all controlled by Arduino, which actually lives in the sleeve. Now the machine. So we're also turning the eight essentially the 8 little strips into a wider range by extending out into the music by using a Raspberry Pi running a machine learning model put out by TensorFlow Project Magenta called Piano Genie. Piano Genie essentially takes 8 inputs and expands that out musically into what would be an 88 piano keyboard. The output from that, from the Raspberry Pi, is essentially, originally we were using audio, but this time we decided to actually pump out to MIDI. The idea is that we'll have, rather than relying on wireless mics, we'll rely on Bluetooth MIDI or another kind of MIDI over the air to basically have a standalone dress that can be performed. The Raspberry Pi is actually hidden in the ruffles of the dress in the back. Everything's powered by just a good old phone battery, and it seems to work fine. So if people are a little bit interested to see what goes on underneath, essentially the Raspberry Pi is running Magenta using a JavaScript library. So we're running it within a Node app. And all that basically happened there is it's reading in serial from the Arduino, just essentially byte data, because we have eight little individual controls. So it's coming in as a byte. We parse that out. We run it through Piano Genie to take a input from one of the buttons to actually get a MIDI note. and then that gets output as MIDI. So the fun thing about that is that if we hit a particular note, you'll hear that it's essentially not the same note every time. It'll change. And that's essentially the model which has been trained on classical music pieces to actually expand that melody, expand those 8 buttons into something that is actually sounds a little bit more melodic. And I think we would like to do a little demo. So we're gonna stop screen sharing. Okay. Go for it.
So one of the things that you'll notice as we play this, and I'm going to let it not play for a while, is we wanted both a musical output and kind of a light output so that people could experience this garment both ways, both visually and through music. So if you'll notice, I'm not playing the garment right now, and we're getting kind of more of these white and yellow tones, and the lights aren't turning on very quickly. And then as soon as I start playing, we get more of these pink and blue tones, and there's a lot more activity that happens on the garment.
Yeah. And because it's all MIDI, we basically we basically are able to switch the instruments on the fly really easily. For example, we can switch to another instrument. Let's try this one. A cello sound, but that's all the magic of MIDI. Oh, and yeah. We could also introduce a little backing soundtrack as well.
Lessons learned.
Yeah.
All right. So some lessons learned about the construction of this garment. We've done several things with conductive fabric, and it does need to be stored carefully because you can run into issues where if you make parts of the connection too thin, or if you use a silver fabric, it might tarnish and you'll lose some of the connectivity. So it won't be as conductive. You might not be able to play all parts of your garment. Mm-hmm. You want to talk about software issues?
The software we're running a Raspberry Pi, the biggest problem we had initially was getting good quality sound out of the Pi. Just relying on the built-in audio system on the Raspberry Pi gave us sound that was a little clicky, and also we have we also decided to move over to MIDI just because we can rely on external sound modules that can be plugged in directly into a soundboard at either like at a show or be it a festival or a music venue. Kind of separated just the music generation out of the piece, just to make what runs on the dress a little bit more manageable, stable, and just to leave the dress as essentially a controller. But yeah, I think that's, it's been fun. Yeah, I think that is our talk, unless there's anything else.
So thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions about conductive fabrics or any of the electronics or music that we used or the components that we used for this project, Hal will be hanging out in the Discord and can answer some questions for you. I guess we'll play it out.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate you speaking with Remoticon again.